Alrighty, guys. Well, I guess when we went to take a break, I accidentally hit the stop button. So here's part two for you. Anyway, Notre Dame, UNC, 3:30 p.m. East. North Carolina's -1, totals 59.5. Now, the Tar Heels have put on an offensive clinic in the early season. They're averaging over 51 points a game, and they're in the top 5 in yards per contest. Now, Drake May, he's completing over 74% of his passes, and he has 11 touchdowns to just 1 interception. Meanwhile, rushing-wise, the Tar Heels are gaining nearly 250 yards a game on the ground. They're taking on a Notre Dame defense who's struggled stopping the run this year. They're actually 94th in the nation in rush defense right now. Meanwhile, offensively, they've had their issues moving the football. They're 113th in total yards per contest. Now, when it comes to the total in this one, UNC did see contests with Appalachian State and Florida A&M get over the number. I'm going to lean toward North Carolina -1 over 59.5. Next matchup, Minnesota taking on Michigan State, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, Minnesota's -3, totals 51. But as good as Minnesota's numbers are, they've played some real duds to start the year. They've beaten up on the likes of Colorado, Western Illinois, and New Mexico State. They're also facing a Michigan State team who's averaging nearly 40 points a game. Jalen Berger and Jarek Broussard, they've combined for nearly 400 yards on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, Jacoby Windman leads the country with 4 forced fumbles from that linebacker spot. He's also second in sacks with 55 of them. Now, total-wise, Michigan State did see their contest against Washington last Saturday get double digits over the number. Meanwhile, Minnesota, they saw their last 2 straight get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Michigan State +3 over 51. Next ball game, Indiana taking on Cincinnati, 3:30 p.m. East. Cincinnati's -17, totals 54.5. Now, the Cincinnati offense has been really cooking. They're in the top 20 in passing. Meanwhile, defensively, it's been pretty hard to move the ball against the Bearcats. They're allowing only 150 pass yards a game. Now, Ivan Pace and Jaheim Thomas, they have nearly 50 total tackles between the two of them. They're also facing an Indiana squad who's given up a whole bunch of yards. The Hoosiers are allowing nearly 200 yards a game on the ground, and they actually rank 118th in total yards allowed per game. Now, total-wise, Indiana saw their last 2 straight get over the line. Meanwhile, Cincy's 3-0 to the over themselves, I'm going to lean towards Cincinnati -17 over 54.5. Next ball game, James Madison taking on Appalachian State, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, Appy State's -7.5 at home, totals 57.5. Now, the Mountaineers failed to cover against Troy this past week. Matter of fact, that was a miracle Hail Mary, not even a traditional Hail Mary. But I'll tell you this much, out of 3 games this season, Appy State's only covered once. So it's not a crazy good covering team right now. And their defense has actually run into some trouble. They're 88th in the country in pass defense, and they're allowing 35 points a game. Now, they're also taking on a JMU team who's in the top 20 in the country in yards per game. Quarterback Todd Centeio, he's thrown for 9 touchdowns and 0 interceptions through a couple of ball games. Meanwhile, Chris Thornton, he's averaging over 120 yards a game receiving, and he scored 5 times already through a couple of games. Now, total-wise, the Dukes saw their most recent outing get 16 points over the number. Meanwhile, Appy State saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the line. I'm going to lean toward James Madison +7.5 over 57.5. Next ball game, it is going to be Toledo taking on San Diego State, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, Toledo's -1, totals 46.5. And as bad as San Diego State's been this year, I don't think Toledo's the type of team to really be laying any type of points on the road. They already failed to cover in 2 of 3 to start the season. They're also facing a San Diego State team who does a nice job defending the pass. The Aztecs are holding their opponents to just 199 yards a game through the air. Michael Shawcroft and Patrick McMorris, they've also combined for nearly 40 tackles. Now, total-wise, the Aztecs did see their opener with Arizona get over the line. Meanwhile, Toledo went 2-0 to the over the past couple of weeks. I'm going to lean towards San Diego State +1 over 46 and a hook. Next game, Florida International taking on Western Kentucky, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, WKU's -28, total 66.5. And as absurd as this number is, I actually think the Hilltoppers can cover it. They're 2-0 against the spread over the past couple of games, and they've been pretty much throwing it all over the field. Dawood Davis and Malachi Corley, they've combined for nearly 450 receiving yards and 5 scores. They're actually in the top 30 in passing yards per game. Meanwhile, on the defensive side of things, these guys have forced 11 turnovers already through 3 games. Now, they're taking on an FIU team who's done very little to establish a run game. They're averaging under 65 yards a game on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, they have one of the worst pass defenses in the country. They're 120th in passing yards allowed per game. Now, total-wise, oddly enough, FIU did see their most recent outing fall double digits under the number. Meanwhile, 2 out of their opponents' last 3 ball games fell under the total as well. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Western Kentucky -28, under 66 and a hook. Next ball game, it is going to be North Texas taking on Memphis, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, Memphis is -12, total 68.5. And for a team laying 2 scores here, the Tigers have had their issues on defense. They're currently 111th in pass defense. They're also facing a North Texas team who's averaging over 475 total yards per game. Now, the Mean Green's thrown for over 1,000 yards already, and they've pretty much been able to run it anywhere they want. Io Adei and Oscar Attaway, they've combined for over 625 rushing yards through 3 games. When it comes to the total, North Texas went 2-0 to the over in their last couple of ball games. Meanwhile, Memphis on the other side, they are 3-0 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean toward North Texas +12 over 68.5. Next ball game I have for you, it is going to be Texas Southern taking on Texas San Antonio, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, this game's currently off the board, and even though UTSA stinks, they do have 2 covers on the season. The Roadrunners covered against the likes of Army and Houston. They've also had little issue throwing the football. Zachary Franklin has over 300 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Meanwhile, wideouts Josh Cephas and DeCorian Clark, they have just about 500 yards receiving between the 2 of them. Now, they're taking on a Texas Southern team on the other side of things who lost 2 of 3 to start the season. They actually gave up 109 total points in those 2 losses. I'm going to lean toward UTSA getting the job done against the number. All right, next ball game I have for you, it is going to be Oregon taking on Washington State. That's going to be a 4 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Oregon's -6.5, totals 54, and this seems like a very generous number for Oregon backers, but I feel like this is a pretty dangerous letdown spot for Oregon backers. Despite getting a big win against BYU, you can't neglect the fact that the Ducks struggle with pass defense. These guys are actually 114th in the country in stopping the pass. They're taking on a 3-0 Washington State team who covered in their last 2 straight, and they haven't allowed over 17 points in any game this year. Dion Henley, he's 6th in Division I in sacks with 4 of them. He also has 30 tackles and a pick, and a couple of forced fumbles as well. And aside from giving up only 12 points a game this year, the Cougs are currently in the top 35 in fewest total yards allowed. And when it comes to the number, WAZZU's 3-0 to the under. Meanwhile, Oregon saw their opener against Georgia fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward Washington State plus 6.5, under 54. Next matchup, Tulsa taking on Ole Miss, 4 o'clock East. Ole Miss is minus 19.5, total 61. Now, this Rebel defense has been absolutely dominant. They've allowed only 13 points through 3 ball games. They have a top 20 rush defense. Troy Brown and Tysheem Johnson, they've combined for nearly 40 tackles. Meanwhile, offensively, Zach Evans and Keenshawn Judkins, they've combined for over 600 yards on the ground. Now they're taking on a Tulsa defense on the other side of things who's going to have their hands full. These guys are actually allowing 31 points a game already, and they're 85th in rush defense. Now, the Golden Hurricane also failed to cover against the likes of Northern Illinois and Wyoming. When it comes to the total, Tulsa's 3-0 to the over. Meanwhile, Ole Miss saw their game with Central Arkansas get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Ole Miss minus 19.5, over 61. Next ball game I have for you, it is going to be Georgia Tech taking on Central Florida. That's going to be a 4 o'clock Eastern start time. UCF's minus 21, totals 57.5. And I'll tell you what, for those of you who've been watching me for years, you clearly know that I've not been on the UCF train at all. I think they have that little brother complex. They're not even in the same category as Florida, Florida State, Miami, just talent-wise. You're not. I'm sorry. Schedule-wise, you're just not. And you haven't been. And declaring yourself the national champions that one year was ridiculous. Having said that, I can't see these guys failing to cover here. They're averaging over 530 yards a game, and they rank in the top 5 in rushing. John Reese Plumlee and Isaiah Bowser, they've combined for 8 rushing touchdowns between the two of them. And matter of fact, quarterback John Plumlee, he's combined for nearly 1,200 yards through the air and with his legs. Now, they're taking on a Georgia Tech defense who gives up nearly 450 yards a game, and they rank 108th in rush defense. When it comes to the total, UCF could potentially put this one over themselves. They also saw their opener against South Carolina State get over the line. I'm going to lean towards Central Florida, minus 21, over 57.5. Next matchup, Sacramento State taking on Colorado State. That's going to be a 4 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, that game's currently off the board. And if you're a Colorado State fan, you may want to be concerned about this year. The Rams have already lost 3 straight, and they failed to cover miserably in all of those losses. I mean, this is one of those games like you have to win. You scheduled it, you paid for a W, and I don't know if this one's guaranteed. This Rams offense, they're scoring just 11 points a game, and they're also facing a Sacramento State team who's 2-0 on the year and scored 93 points in those victories. So be careful, Colorado State bettors. This number may be a little high when it opens up. You don't want to be laying too many points in this spot. But regardless, I'm going to lean towards Sacramento State getting the job done against the point spread. Next game, Arizona Cal, 5:30 p.m. East. Cal's minus 3.5, totals 48 and a hook. Now, I do actually think Cal's a better ball club here. They played a talented Notre Dame team, very tough, and they had chances to win that game. Now, I get it. Notre Dame's struggling, but they have Class A athletes at Notre Dame, and Cal was right there with them. Now, the Golden Bears, they've also covered in 2 out of their 3 ball games this year, and they've hung tough with some pretty good defense. They're allowing only 199 yards a game passing. They're also led by Jackson Sermon and Olu Oladeju, who have over 50 tackles between the two of them. Now they're taking on an Arizona team who they're really not prolific runners. They're 96th in the nation in rush yards per game. Meanwhile, defensively, these guys have a pretty tough time stopping the run. They're 107th in rush defense. Now, when it comes to the total, Arizona saw their contest against Mississippi State fall under the total. Meanwhile, Cal's last two straight went under the line. I'm going to lean toward the Cal Golden Bears minus 3.5, under 48 and a hook. Next ball game, Akron Liberty, 6 o'clock East. Now, Liberty's minus 28, totals 57.5. Now, the Flames got big problems on defense, in my opinion. They're allowing over 170 yards a game on the ground, and they rank 100th in Division I in that category I just mentioned. They also squeaked by Southern Miss, and they actually only beat UAB by a score. They're taking on an Akron team who's played some real Power 5 schools in their past couple of outings, and even though they got blasted, make no mistake about it, I'll tell you what, these are the kind of teams that sneak up on teams like Liberty, because they don't completely outclass Akron with regard to talent. They might be slightly more talented, but not much. They're laying 28, and they're overlooking them. I just know it. Liberty, I think, thinks they're a lot better than what they are. Now, Akron's also done a nice job protecting the football. These Akron quarterbacks have yet to throw an interception. And total-wise, of course, I'm not looking for the Zips to light up the scoreboard. They're also 2-1 to the under for the year. Meanwhile, Liberty saw their second contest of the season fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward Akron, plus 28, keeping this one close, under 57 and a hook. Next ball game, Navy, East Carolina, 6 o'clock East. ECU's minus 16, totals 48.5. Now, the Pirates of ECU, they're a perfect 3-0 against the number here this season. And they're currently on a 2-game winning streak. Now, they covered against a really good NC State team, and they held them to only 21 points. They also beat the brakes off Old Dominion 39-21. And this is an ECU defense that plays really tough against the run. And they're going to need that Saturday. The Pirates have a top 25 rush defense. Juan Powell and Tegan Wilk, they have over 35 tackles between the two of them. Meanwhile, running back Keaton Mitchell, he's rushing for over 125 yards a game. Now, they're taking on a Navy team who's having a real down year. They're 0-2 to start the season, and they scored just 20 total points. Meanwhile, defensively, these guys are 124th in stopping the pass. Now, total-wise, Navy saw their opener against Delaware fall under the number. Meanwhile, ECU went 11 points below the total against NC State. I'm going to lean toward East Carolina, minus 16, under 48.5. Next matchup, Ball State, Georgia Southern, 6 o'clock East. Georgia Southern's minus 9.5, total 60 on a hook. Now, Georgia Southern won 2 of 3 this year and failed to cover only one time during that span. The Eagles also have an explosive offense led by quarterback Kyle Van Treese, who's thrown for nearly 1,000 yards already. Now, wide receivers Caleb Hood and Derwin Burgess, they've combined for over 400 yards receiving together. They're taking on a Ball State defense who allows nearly 400 total yards a game themselves. Now, they're also 101st in points allowed. When it comes to the total, 2 out of Ball State's last 3 got over the number. Meanwhile, Georgia Southern saw overs against the likes of Morgan State and Nebraska. I'm going to lean toward Georgia Southern, minus 9.5, over 60 and a hook. Next ball game, Arkansas State taking on Old Dominion, 6 o'clock East. Old Dominion's minus 5.5, totals 56 and a hook. And following a huge win in the opener over Virginia Tech, the Monarchs have lost their last 2 straight, and they struggled on offense. ODU's rushing for only 67 yards a game, and they're currently 118th in total yards. Meanwhile, defensively, they've been pretty awful stopping the run. They're allowing nearly 225 yards a game on the ground. They're taking on an Arkansas State team who's a perfect 3-0 against the number. They also scored 90 total points in their Memphis and Grambling contest combined. Now, Champ Fleming and Seydou Traore, they've combined for nearly 400 receiving yards. When it comes to the total, Arkansas State's 2-1 to the over. Meanwhile, ODU, they saw their game with ECU get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas State plus 5.5, over 56 and a hook. Next matchup, it is going to be Rice taking on Houston, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Houston's minus 17.5, totals 57. And even though they're laying nearly 18 points, the Cougs actually have pretty big problems on defense. They've allowed 33 points or more in all of their contests this season. They're also 117th in yards allowed. They're taking on a Rice team who's allowed just 31 points in their last 2 outings. And speaking of which, they're coming fresh off a huge win over a very good Ragin' Cajun squad. They beat Louisiana by 12 points in that ball game. Myron Morrison and Marcus Williams, they have over 20 tackles between the two of them. When it comes to the total, both schools are 3-0 to the over on the year. I'm going to lean toward Rice plus 17.5, over 57. Next matchup, it is going to be Northern Illinois taking on Kentucky, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Kentucky's minus 26, totals 52 and a hook. Now, Kentucky's got one of the best defenses in the SEC. They're allowing only 9 points a game, and they're actually in the top 15 in pass defense. J.J. Weaver and DeAndre Square, they have 30 tackles combined. Meanwhile, offensively, wide receivers Dane Key and Tavion Robinson, they're averaging over 15 yards per reception. Now, they're taking on a Northern Illinois squad who lost their last 2 straight. And I'll tell you what, they give up a whole lot of points. They're allowing nearly 35 points a game, and they actually rank 115th in pass defense. Now, total-wise, the Huskies are 3-0 to the over to start the year. They've seen overs against the likes of Vandy, Tulsa, and Eastern Kentucky. I'm going to lean toward the Kentucky Wildcats minus 26, over 52.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Arkansas taking on Texas A&M, 7 o'clock East. Now, the Aggies of Texas A&M, they are minus 2.5, totals 48. And even though TAMU's got some crazy good defense, I don't know if they're going to be able to score enough to cover that 2.5. I don't know if they're going to be able to score enough to win. They're 109th in the country in total yards per contest. They're also facing an Arkansas defense who's holding their opponents to under 70 yards a game rushing. Now, offensively, on the other side of the football, the Razorbacks have had little issue getting down the field. They're getting over 500 yards a game, and they're led by Raheem Sanders, who's running for 147 yards per contest. Now, total-wise, Arkansas saw their opener against Cincinnati fall under the number. Meanwhile, Texas A&M's 3-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas plus 2.5, under 48. All right, next matchup. A lot of eyes on this one, probably not for the right reasons, probably more for like lack of scoring and props. But anyway, Iowa, Rutgers, 7 o'clock East. Iowa's minus 7.5 on the road, totals 34 and a hook. Now, the Hawkeyes failed to cover in 2 of 3 this year, and they have one of the worst offenses in the country. They're throwing for just 125 yards a game. They're also 131st in total yards per game. I believe that is dead last. They're taking on a Rutgers team who loves to pound the football. They're a top 25 rushing team, and they punched it in 8 times on the ground already. But the strength of this Scarlet Knight program is their defense. They're allowing only 34 yards a game rushing. Christian Ezian and Deion Jennings, they have nearly 40 tackles between the two of them. Meanwhile, Robert Longerbeam has a pair of interceptions from that secondary. When it comes to the total, Rutgers saw 2 out of their last 3 fall under the number. Meanwhile, Iowa's 3-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean toward Rutgers plus 7.5, under 34 and a hook. Next ball game, Southern Miss taking on Tulane, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Tulane's minus 13.5, totals 50 and a hook. Now, this does actually kind of feel like a letdown spot for the Green Wave. It's tough to get up for Southern Miss after you beat Kansas State last week. That's a huge win for your program. That's a legit team you just beat. Now you got to play Southern Miss. And just keep in mind, 2 out of Tulane's 3 wins this year came against teams like Alcorn State and UMass. So keep that in mind. Now they're taking on a Southern Miss team who's a perfect 3-0 against the number themselves. Covers over the likes of Liberty and Miami, the Hurricanes, during that span. Southern Miss is also led by defensive back Malik Shorts, who has a couple of interceptions and 28 tackles on the year. Now, total-wise, I'm really not looking for a barn burner in this one. Southern Miss saw their game against Miami fall 14 points under the total. Meanwhile, Tulane's 3-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean towards Southern Miss plus 13.5, under 50 and a hook. Next ball game, UNLV taking on Utah State, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. UNLV's minus 2.5, total 61 and a hook. Now, the Runnin' Rebels are a perfect 3-0 against the spread to start the season. They're averaging over 41 points a game, and they're actually in the top 35 in total yards. Aiden Robbins has rushed for 115 yards a game, and he's scored 6 times already. Meanwhile, wideout Ricky White, he's averaging over 105 yards a game receiving. They're taking on a Utah State defense who's 115th in yards allowed per contest. They're also giving up nearly 250 yards a game on the ground. When it comes to the total, the Rebels saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the number. I'm going to lean toward UNLV minus 2.5, over 61 and a hook. Next ball game, Houston Baptist taking on Texas State, 7 o'clock East. This game's currently off the board. Now, the Texas State Bobcats lost 2 of 3 to start the year, and they covered only once during that span. Quarterback Lane Hatcher's thrown 3 interceptions already. He's been sacked 8 times. Now they're taking on a Houston Baptist club who beat Northern Colorado in their opener 46-34. I'm going to lean toward Houston Baptist getting the job done against the number. Next matchup, Marshall taking on Troy, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Marshall's the 3-point favorite on the road, totals 52 and a hook. And following an historic program win over Notre Dame a few weeks ago, the Herd fell to Bowling Green in overtime just last week. That said, though, we are still looking at a Marshall team who's very tough to stop offensively. These guys are rushing for nearly 275 yards a game, and they rank 15th in the nation in total yards. Running back Kalen LeBourne is averaging nearly 150 yards a game, and he scored 5 times on the ground. Now they're taking on a Troy squad who's had a tough time slowing down the run. These guys are also 102nd in total yards allowed. When it comes to the total, Troy's 2-0 to the over in their last couple of games. Meanwhile, Marshall saw their most recent outing get over the total. I'm going to lean toward Marshall minus 3, over 52.5. Next ball game, it is going to be Louisiana Tech taking on South Alabama, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. South Alabama's minus 13.5, totals 59. And even though this is a pretty big number, South Alabama's had no problem covering the point spread this year. They're 3-0 against the number with covers against the likes of Central Michigan and UCLA. Now, the Jags have also done a nice job slinging it through the air. They're a top 25 pass offense, and they're led by wideouts Jalen Wayne and Colin Lacey, who combined for just about 500 receiving yards. Now they're taking on a Louisiana Tech team on the other side who lost 2 of 3, and they allowed an absurd amount of points. When it comes to stopping the run, these guys are 130th in rush defense. Now, total-wise, South Alabama could possibly put this one over the total themselves. They're also 3-0 to the over for the year. Meanwhile, La Tech's 3-0 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean towards South Alabama minus 13.5, over 59. All right, guys, I'm going to take my next and final break for the video. This has been a long podcast. I'm not going to touch the screen because when I touched it, I guess I turned the thing off. So we're going to leave it going, and I'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, thanks for the break, guys. I really appreciate that. Thanks, man. Thanks a lot. What did we just cover? South Alabama, yeah. No, seriously, guys, thank you. Thank you for letting me take that break. I really appreciate it. All right, next matchup here. Vandy taking on Bama, 7:30 p.m. East. Alabama's minus 39.5, totals 59. And even though the Tide should cover this number, I can't lay 39.5 points in a conference game. I know how good Bama is. I get it. And I realize it's Vandy, but these guys are not helpless. They are 2-1 on the year, and they have shown they can move it downfield. Matter of fact, Will Sheppard has over 300 yards receiving already and 7 touchdowns. When it comes to running the football, the Commodores are gaining nearly 225 yards a game on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Bama team who looked very human against Texas a few weeks ago. And once again, guys, this is a ridiculously large number for an in-conference game. Now, total-wise, Bama did see their game a few days ago fly over the number. Meanwhile, Vandy's 4-0 to the over for the whole year. I'm going to lean toward Vanderbilt plus 39.5. I guess keeping that one close. And the over 59. Next matchup, little Big Ten action. I'm talking about Wisconsin taking on Ohio State. 7:30 Eastern start time. Ohio State's minus 17.5, totals 56. And even though Wisconsin has one of the toughest defenses in the country, just keep in mind, 2 out of their 3 games this year were against Illinois State and New Mexico State. As a matter of fact, their only true test was against Washington State, and they scored only 14 points and a loss. They're taking on an Ohio State team who leads the country in total yards. C.J. Stroud's thrown for 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. He completes 73% of his passes. Meanwhile, wide receivers Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka, they have over 300 receiving yards respectively. Now, when it comes to the total, both schools went 2-1 to the under to start the year. I'm going to lean toward Ohio State minus 17.5, under 56. Next game, Uconn Nc State, 7:30 p.m. East. NC State's minus 38.5, totals 51. Now, the Wolfpack might just be the real deal here, guys. They're 3-0 on the year, and they covered in their last 2 straight. Now, their defense has also been nearly impossible to run against. They're in the top 10 in rush defense, and they forced 9 turnovers already. Now, Derek Pitts, Drake Thomas, and Tanner Ingle, they all have 18 tackles apiece. They're taking on a Uconn team who lost their last 2 straight by a total of 107-14. They lost their last 2 straight by a combination score of 107-14. Now, the Huskies are officially 123rd in total yards, and they're throwing for less than 110 yards a game. Axe the program. Get rid of it. This is like an embarrassment. Now, total-wise, the Huskies are 2-0 to the over in their last couple of contests. Meanwhile, NC State, they saw their game with Charleston Southern get over the number. I'm going to lean toward the Wolfpack, minus 38.5, over 51. Next ball game, New Mexico taking on LSU, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, LSU's minus 30.5, totals 46. Now, the Tigers are on a 2-game winning streak, and they did cover the number in both of those victories. Now, they're also averaging 40 points a game offensively. And when it comes to the defense, well, they've been awfully tough to throw against. These guys are holding their opponents under 180 yards a game passing. Jay Ward's leading the team in tackles with 19 of them. He also has a couple of PBUs and a pick. The Tigers are taking on a New Mexico team who's no threat throwing the football. These guys are 123rd in pass offense. Quarterback Miles Kendrick, he's completing only 56% of his passes. He's thrown only 3 touchdowns. As a matter of fact, his leading receivers averaging less than 50 yards a game. When it comes to the total, the Lobos did see their game against Boise get over the number. Meanwhile, LSU had a game against Southern fly over the number themselves. They should be able to put this one over by themselves. I'm going to lean toward LSU minus 30.5, over 46. Next contest, Miami, Ohio taking on Northwestern, 7:30 Eastern start time. Now, Northwestern's minus 7 at home, totals 51.5. Now, this does feel like a dicey spot for Northwestern backers. Miami lost to 2 really good teams in Cincinnati and Kentucky, and they actually did cover against the Bearcats on Saturday. Now, the Red Hawks have also been real tough to run against. They're allowing only 75 yards a game on the ground. They actually rank in the top 15 in rush defense. Caden Woolard's leading the pass rush with 3 sacks on the year already. Meanwhile, Ryan McWood, he has a team-best 31 tackles. Now they're taking on a Northwestern squad who's coming fresh off a 7-point loss to Southern Illinois. This defense has also given up just way too many yards. They're 109th in total yards allowed per game. Now when it comes to the total, Northwestern went 2-0 to the under in their last couple of contests. Meanwhile, Miami went 2-0 to the under, throwing out that Cincy game. I'm going to lean toward Miami, Ohio, +7, keeping that one close, under 51.5. Next matchup, Charlotte, South Carolina, 7:30 p.m. East. South Carolina is -22, total 66. Now the Gamecocks are a bit unpolished to be laying this many points. And I'll tell you what, this is also a pretty easy game to overlook. And I just don't know if the Gamecocks are good enough to look past anyone. I know they have more talent. I get that. But if you're underprepared and you're looking ahead, especially to another SEC game, these are one of the, those games that can clip you, especially if you're, betting the number. Now, South Carolina, their quarterbacks have thrown only 3 interceptions compared to only 3 touchdowns compared to 6 interceptions. And they've also done, little to establish a run game. They're averaging only 70 yards a game on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Charlotte team who actually does a decent job passing the ball. They've thrown for nearly 1,200 yards already with just 2 interceptions. Grant DeBose and Elijah Spencer, they have over 625 receiving yards between the two of them. When it comes to the total, the 49ers saw their last 3 straight get over the number. Meanwhile, South Carolina saw their game against Arkansas get 18 points over the line. I'm going to lean towards Charlotte, +22, over 66. Next ball game, Florida Atlantic taking on Purdue, 7:30 p.m. East. Now Purdue's -19.5, total 62. Now the Boilermakers should pretty much throw for 1 million yards against the Owls on Saturday. Aiden O'Connor's throwing it for over 350 yards a game, and he threw just 1 interception. Now his favorite target's been Charlie Jones, who has nearly 500 yards receiving already and 5 touchdowns. Now they're taking on an FAU secondary who's one of the worst in the country. These guys are 113th in pass defense. They also allowed 81 total points in their games against UCF and Ohio. When it comes to the total, that very game against Ohio I just mentioned did get over the number. Meanwhile, Purdue's 3-0 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean toward Purdue, -19.5, over 62. All right, next matchup, little Big 12 action. I'm talking about Kansas State taking on Oklahoma, and that's going to be an 8 o'clock Eastern kickoff on Saturday. OU's -12.5, totals 51. And as good as OU's looked, they're actually going up against a pretty tough Kansas State defense. These guys are in the top 10 in the country in pass defense. They're also giving up just 9 points a game. Austin Moore has 19 tackles on the season. Meanwhile, Sincere Mason, Kobe Savage, and Daniel Green, they all have a pair of interceptions apiece. Now, they're taking on an Oklahoma team who did fail to cover against Kent State. When it comes to the total, both schools have gone 3-0 to the under to start the season. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Kansas State, +12.5, under 51. Next ball game, Hawaii taking on New Mexico State, 8 o'clock East. New Mexico State's -5.5, totals 55 and a hook. And as bad as Hawaii is, well, New Mexico State, they're in no position to lay points at any time. They're 0-4 in the season. They average just 8 points a game. And equally as bad, the Aggies are 130th in the country in total yards per contest. Now they're taking on a Hawaii team who did cover the number in their last 2 straight. They're also led by Malik Hausman, who has 12 tackles and 3 interceptions from the secondary. Now, total-wise, Hawaii saw their last 3 straight stay under the number. Meanwhile, New Mexico State went 3-1 to the under in their last 4. I'm going to lean toward Hawaii plus 5.5, under 55 and a hook. Next ball game, little ACC action. I'm talking about Boston College taking on Florida State, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. FSU's minus 17.5, totals 49. And even though I don't like laying this many points in conference play, the Noles should be able to cover this number. They're rushing for nearly 250 yards a game, and they're in the top 25 in yards per contest. Running back Rashawn Ward's rushing for over 100 yards a game, and he averages 7.6 yards per carry. When it comes to defensive play, the Noles have one of the best secondaries in the country right now. They're in the top 25 in pass defense. They're taking on a BC team who has actually had problems getting first downs. These guys are currently 114th in the nation in total yards per contest. They also failed to cover the number in their last 3 straight. Now, total-wise, both schools saw 2 out of their last 3 ball games fall under the line, respectively. I'm going to lean toward Florida State, minus 17.5, under 49. Next ball game, Louisiana taking on UL Monroe, 8 o'clock Eastern kickoff. The Louisiana Raging Cajuns are minus 8.5, totals 52 and a hook. Now, I actually think the Cajuns are being a little bit undervalued here. This is a pretty good team, and I get it. They had a tough loss to Rice, where they most likely overlooked them. And another one of those schools, you can't overlook anybody. You are good, but you're not that good to look past another team. And I'll tell you what, Louisiana, they're still doing a nice job stopping the run on defense. They're allowing just 100 yards a game on the ground. Casey Osai and Jordan Thibodeau, they've got nearly 50 tackles between the two of them. And this Cajun defense, they also have 8 interceptions already. Now they're taking on a UL Monroe team who's allowing 41 points a game. They're giving up over 40 yards per contest. Meanwhile, on the offensive end, these guys are being held to just 287 yards a game. Now, total-wise, the Warhawks saw 2 of 3 this year fall under the number. Meanwhile, the Cajuns saw their opener fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward Louisiana minus 8.5, under 52 and a hook. Next ball game, USC taking on Oregon State, 9:30 p.m. East. The USC Trojans are minus 6.5, total 69. The Trojans are averaging 51 points a game. They're also scoring nearly 525, they're averaging nearly 525 yards of total offense per contest. Jordan Addison and Mario Williams, they've combined for nearly 500 yards receiving. No real surprise here, guys. The Trojans have a top 20 pass offense. They're taking on an Oregon State team who allowed 60 points in their last 2 outings. When it comes to the total, the Beavers saw their last 2 straight get over the number. Meanwhile, USC saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward USC minus 6.5, over 69. Next matchup, Wyoming taking on BYU, 10:15 East. BYU's minus 22.5, totals 51 and a hook. Now, in my opinion, this number really stinks. Like, the Cougs just got blasted by Oregon on the road, and they gave up 41 total points in that loss. And they're laying 22.5 here. Well, the Cougs are still averaging 32 points a game, and they do have a nice job. They do a nice job of throwing the football. Jaron Hall's completing nearly 70% of his passes, and he's thrown just 1 interception. Meanwhile, defensively, the Cougs are limiting their competition to under 180 yards a game passing. Now they're taking on a Wyoming team who's one of the worst passing teams in college football. They're throwing for under 148 yards a game, and right now they're 111th in total yards. Now, total-wise, the Cowboys went 2-0 to the under in their last couple of games. Meanwhile, BYU saw their contest against Baylor fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward BYU minus 22.5 and the under 51 and a hook in the tight window. All right, next ball game. I think this is the last one for the show. Hello. It is going to be Utah taking on Arizona State, 10:30 p.m. East. Now, Utah's minus 14, totals 52. Now, the Utes played some really bad football teams over the past few weeks, and they did blast them. I also think we will see an overreaction from the public with regard to Arizona State. They took a bad outright loss to Eastern Michigan on their home field Saturday, but we're still looking at an Arizona State secondary who's one of the best in the country. These guys are allowing only 172 yards a game through the air. They're actually in the top 25 in pass defense. Now, Kyle Sowell has a pair of interceptions and 39 tackles on the season. When it comes to the total, the Sun Devils are 3-0 to the under this year. Meanwhile, Utah saw their most recent outing fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward Arizona State plus 14, under 52. Next game, Stanford taking on Washington, 10:30 p.m. East. Washington's minus 12.5, total 62. Now, the Huskies have pretty much been unstoppable with the ball in their hands. They're in the top 3 in pass offense, and they're averaging just about 550 yards a game. Michael Penix, he's thrown for 10 touchdowns and only 1 interception. He's also been sacked 0 times. And his favorite target has been Jalen McMillan, who averages over 100 yards a game and has 3 scores. Now, defensively, on the other side of the football, the Huskies are allowing only 18 points per contest, and they rank in the top 20 in yards allowed. They're taking on a Stanford squad who failed to cover in both of their games this year. They also allowed 41 points to USC in their most recent outing. Now, total-wise, Washington could put this one over themselves. They're also 3-0 to the over on the year. I'm going to lean toward Washington minus 12.5, over 62. And with that, guys, this is our next and final matchup for the video. It is going to be Western Michigan taking on San Jose State, 10:30 Eastern start time. San Jose State's minus 5.5, totals 51 and a hook. Now, San Jose State's led by Trey Jenkins and Kyle Harmon on defense. These guys have combined for 30 tackles. They also covered in their most recent outing against Auburn. They're taking on a Western Michigan team who lost 2 of 3 to start the year. And they're also allowing 33 points a game. This Bronco defense currently finds themselves 111th in total yards allowed. When it comes to the total in this one, Western Michigan, they saw their opener fall under the line. Meanwhile, San Jose State, they are 2-0 to the under themselves. I'm going to lean towards San Jose State minus 5.5, under 51 and a hook. And with that, guys, now it's time for our quick pick recap. I like West Virginia minus 3 over 53. Georgia State plus 3 over 63.5. UT Chattanooga against the spread. Virginia plus 10 under 55.5. Nevada plus 24.5 under 48. UTEP plus 15.5 over 46 and a hook. Kent State plus 44 under 59.5. Maryland plus 17 over 62.5 points. Clemson minus 7 over 55 and a hook. Penn State minus 26.5 over 60.5 points. Baylor plus 3 under 44.5. Pittsburgh against the spread. Missouri plus 7.5 over 52 and a hook. Mississippi State minus 29.5 over 57. TCU plus 1 under 68.5. Duke plus 9 over 64 and a hook. Louisville minus 13.5 over 64. Michigan minus 5.5 over 61. UCLA minus 21 over 58.5. Temple minus 10 under 44.5. Give me Fordham getting the job done against the spread. I like Florida plus 11 over 63. Texas Tech plus 5.5 under 60. Middle Tennessee plus 26 under 53.5. I like UNC minus 1 over 59 and a hook. Michigan State plus 3 over 51. Cincinnati minus 17 over 54.5. James Madison plus 7.5 over 57 and a hook. San Diego State plus 1 over 46.5. Western Kentucky minus 28 under 66 and a hook. North Texas plus 12 over 68.5. Give me UTSA. That's Texas San Antonio getting the job done against the spread. I like Washington State plus 6.5 under 54. Give me Ole Miss minus 19.5 over 61. I like Central Florida minus 21 over 57.5. Give me Sacramento State getting the job done against the spread. I like Cal minus 3.5 under 48 and a hook. Give me Akron plus 28 under 57.5. ECU minus 16 under 48 and a hook. Georgia Southern minus 9.5 over 60.5 points. Arkansas State plus 5.5 over 56.5. Rice plus 17.5 over 57. Kentucky minus 26 over 52 and a hook. Arkansas plus 2.5 under 48. Rutgers plus 7.5 under 34.5. Southern Miss plus 13.5 under 50 and a hook. UNLV minus 2.5 over 61.5 points. Houston Baptist getting the job done against the spread. Marshall minus 3 over 52.5. South Alabama minus 13.5 over 59. Vandy plus 39.5 over 59. Ohio State minus 17.5 under 56. NC State minus 38.5 over 51. LSU minus 30.5 over 46. Miami, Ohio plus 7 under 51 and a hook. Charlotte plus 22 over 66. Purdue minus 19.5 over 62. Kansas State minus 12.5 under 51. Hawaii plus 5.5 under 55 and a hook. Florida State minus 17.5 under 49. Louisiana minus 8.5 under 52.5 points. USC minus 6.5 over 69. BYU minus 22.5 under 51 and a hook. Arizona State plus 14 under 52. Washington minus 12.5 over 62. With my next and final free pick for the video, I'm going to lean towards San Jose State minus 5.5 under 51 and a hook. And with that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Don't forget to check me out on my website. Now, if you guys do end up getting a membership here today, just keep in mind you're going to get billed the day you sign up and then the first of every month following that. But most importantly, guys, got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. Really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. With that said, guys, happy College Football Week 4 to you. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at patreon.com/BrockPage.